Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
In Alaska, wildfire is a threat, but being fire-wise could save your home. Pruning your needle-bearing trees at the correct time of year and in the correct way can help slow down the spread of fire and help prevent bark beetle infestations.
Remove only the bottom 1/3 of the tree, and only from August through April.
They can undercut several inches from the branch collar. The second cut should be through the branch, and the final cut just beyond the branch collar. Wildfires happen. Be ready.
The National Weather Service.
Welcome back to another edition of Alaska Weather. I'm meteorologist Kimberly Hoeppner, and today is July 21st, 2014. When we're not on air, you can always check our information out by going online at www.arh.noaa.gov, or you can call in on our phone line at 1-800-472-0391. And as always, we are available on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. So no warnings today. So the main focus is the fire weather concerns across the state, which are still continuing across the eastern part of the Alaska Range, and areas over the Kenai should be careful as well. Please do not leave burning material unattended, and just make sure they're out before you go away from them. Now looking at the weather that's going to be moving our way over the next day or so, we have this high pressure that's out over the Bering Sea, and then we have low pressure that's transversing just here around the central Aleutians. So this moisture is streaming up, but not as much as it has been for the past few days. You can kind of see that counterclockwise circulation right here, and then the high pressure ridge, we have a clockwise circulation that's bringing some moisture. It's not popping up on satellite as well across the Bering, as the cloud temperatures are very close to the sea temperatures, and when that happens, it doesn't always pick up those clouds. But looking at closer to home, for most people, the clearing was all across the Gulf waters. There were a few high clouds that moved in later this afternoon. The main system that affected the Gulf of Alaska has moved off to the southeast and was near the Dixon entrance this afternoon. Looking across the central interior, mainly partly cloudy skies to fair, and as you went towards the north, we had a large area of cloud cover streaming up as a low pressure is just located just to the north of Barrow. So putting that into motion, you can just see all the cloud cover slowly shifting towards the west. So most of the south central areas are seeing some cloud cover move over this afternoon. Now the southwestern areas are also in cloud cover, and a little break over the Alaska Peninsula during the afternoon hours. So putting that into place one more time, here's that counterclockwise circulation. Taking a look at our weather maps for the day, here's that front that's draped across the northwest. It started off a little bit warmer across the Barrow area, and then this front just kind of drooped on across the central part of the Brooks Range, firing off a few showers down through the Seward Peninsula. So they were a little bit cooler and wetter today again. Across the south central areas and back towards the Panhandle, this ridge was setting up across the area, bringing some drier conditions and very warm across those areas. Now the southeastern, most of the Panhandle had seen fair to partly cloudy skies, and then this low pressure system that's moving in across the Dixon entrance area saw some showers popping up mainly across the southern channels during the afternoon time frame. Now looking at your weather for tonight, this low pressure in the Dixon entrance area will continue to shove off towards the east, bring some possible shower activity in through the evening hours before tapering off. And then we have a possibility of some patchy fog setting up as they observed this morning. So towards Yakutat and on towards the northern channels and the eastern part of the Gulf waters, they might see some fog creeping back in during the morning hours. Now the ridging will stay seated across the central part of the Gulf of Alaska, and the southeast and the south central areas will see another dry night. However, the cold front that's draped across the north and the western locations will continue to push slightly further inland, bring shower activity along with it. So they'll see the majority of the rainfall will occur from the Seward Peninsula and eastward towards the central part of the Brooks Range. Now the southwestern areas might start getting in on the shower activity in the overnight time frame, and some fog is creeping in towards that southwestern coastal area. So if you're in that Bristol Bay area, be prepared because the fog is coming back your way. Now the Alaska Peninsula, with this trough that's just kind of swinging across the eastern part of the Bering, might see an increase in the shower activity as we go through the night periods. Now the western part of the Bering is having another ridge push in, so they'll see some patchy fog condition, possibly areas of fog out in the western Bering area as this ridge continues to push through. And on Tuesday, here's that ridge showing up. It's going to be extending all across towards the northern parts of the Bering as this front makes its way through the southwest. It's going to be a very slow-moving system, so it's a possibility that they see a larger amount of rain across the central part of the Brooks Range, which will affect the Koyukuk River, which is already running high, so you might want to keep an eye out on the locations around the Koyukuk River, as those might cause some flooding issues. And looking back towards the southwest, they have an increase of rain chances for Tuesday, and as this front slowly pushes inland, there'll also be a chance for some afternoon thunderstorms, mainly across the western Alaska Range and the central parts of the interior. Across the Arctic coastal areas, expect continuing light rain and drizzle, and temperatures staying at or just below normal as the rain continues. Now the ridge over the Gulf of Alaska is going to slowly push towards the east, bring some possible showers to the southern channels, but mainly a drying out pattern for the southeast for your Tuesday, starting out with possible morning fog across the northeastern part of the Gulf, and then as we head through the day, those foggy conditions should improve rather quickly. As we head into your Wednesday forecast, taking a look at this frontal area, it's going to be just a large area of showery conditions, low pressure back in control, as the low pressure just to the north of the Barrow area will continuously throw these low pressure systems on towards the east. The remainder of the front that's working its way today is going to be slowly sliding and becoming disorganized as it heads east, but even the southeastern areas will see a chance for showers late in the day on Wednesday. Across the western areas, they'll see another cold front, yet again being pushed off the eastern areas of Russia. As high pressure is right behind it, we'll get a little bit more of a stronger flow across the northern Bering, so look out for gustier winds there and patchy fog or areas of fog on your Wednesday forecast. Across the central interior and north in the same showery pattern through your Wednesday forecast is a stationary boundary is going to be draped across the Brooks Range. So everyone's going to see some showers by midweek as we head into your Wednesday. Today the warmest temperatures were all along the Gulf Coast, and the warmest temperatures of the day occurred over at Seward. They had a high today of 76 before they started cooling off just slightly. The southeastern areas did see temperatures in the upper 50s to mid 60s. The 77 temperature, that was a bad reading. So they reached on average between 60 and 65 today. Now across the central interior, a little bit cooler where the clouds lingered longer today, so they got up to near 60 and in the mid 60s near Eagle. Now along the Brooks Range, the coolest where the front was draped across from the Seward Peninsula in the mid-40s, and along the northeastern or the Beaufort Sea coast, they saw temperatures as high as 50 to 55 degrees. And then along the northwestern coast, they reported this afternoon in the lower 30s for Barrow, but they actually saw temperatures near 47. They were still the coolest spot in the state today. However, they did start a cooling trend through the afternoon. Same for Nome, they were at 37 as well. Across the western coast, a slow warming in temperatures from the mid-40s down to the mid-50s across the southwest, and Bristol Bay area saw up in the upper 60s. Alaska Peninsula was in the lower 60s, and the Aleutian chains and most of the Bering saw temperatures in the lower 50s. Now your overnight temperatures will not change much across the Aleutians in the upper 40s, across the southwest in the upper 40s to lower 50s. The warmest will be across the central interior in the mid-50s, coolest along the coastal areas at freezing or just below for Barrow and Nome. And along the southeastern areas, expect to drop down into the upper 40s where it clears out near Yakutat, and in the lower 50s across the rest of the southeast. And tomorrow we'll climb up again across the southeast in the upper 60s. Across the interior, expect a few breaks in the clouds during the early afternoon, allowing temperatures to climb very high into the mid-70s on average, all the way back through the northern Gulf Coast. However, those clouds will bring a cooling trend as we head towards the evening hour, so it won't be as long as we've experienced the last day. Anyways, the northern coastal areas, they'll see temperatures warming into the mid-30s to lower 40s, a little bit cooler than what they've seen, and in the lower 60s across the southwest, upper 50s across the Alaska Peninsula. The Bering and the Aleutians will see high temperatures tomorrow in the mid-50s. Now, looking at your flying weather with the front draped across the north and western coast, expect MVFR to IFR conditions, and all along the Alaska Peninsula and the rest of the Bering and Aleutian chain. So the flying passes in more depth, Anaktuvik Pass will go IFR to MVFR, and Adigan Pass will be MVFR all day. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass in the frontal area will be both MVFR. Rainy Pass will be MVFR as well. Windy Pass will be VFR for at least tomorrow, and Isabel Pass will be VFR also. And Mentasta Pass, all those areas in the south central will be VFR. Tanita Pass, VFR. Portage, VFR. And then Chilkoot and White Pass should see VFR, possible some morning fog, but probably will stay out of these passes. Looking at your freezing levels tomorrow, the surface freezing level is coming back towards the northwest with a 2,000-foot level at the northwestern coastal areas, draping back towards 10,000 along the southwest. Gulf waters will be between 10 and 12,000, and the Bering will be between 8 and 10,000. Looking at your icing tomorrow, the best probability for light icing will be across the north and northwestern areas back towards the eastern Bering and the central part of the Aleutians. And this will be above 2,000 feet and below 10,000 to the northwest and above 10,000 feet over the Bering. Looking at your jet stream for tomorrow, a little bit change in the pattern as we have a northwesterly flow over the northern Bering that's going to help push the low pressure systems in across the western mainland. And then across the southern part of the Gulf of Alaska, a little bit of a split flow there, and across the northeastern parts of the state, a strong jet all the way through there out of the southwest at 80 knots. Now looking at your 9,000-foot pattern, we have a low pressure system out here in the northwest, so change of direction around that, with the strongest flow again across the northeastern parts of the state. Now the ridging across the Gulf of Alaska will be a little bit calmer, but be aware that just south of the Alaska Peninsula, a strong westerly flow there between 30 and 35 knots. A very similar pattern at 3,000 feet, the low pressure system change of direction southwesterly mostly across the state, and then this low pressure shoving off towards the east, but a light flow around that system there. Now the high pressure will be moving in across the Bering, so a light flow around that ridging out in the bearing. Your turbulence tomorrow to watch out for is going to be across that northeastern area of the state that I just pointed out a moment ago, and that's below 10,000 feet. And then that one area just south of the Alaska Peninsula, eastern Aleutians, that's going to be below 10,000 feet as well. All right, in just a moment, we'll be back with your marine forecast.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Ed Cornfield. On behalf of the Alaskan Aviation Safety Foundation and Alaska Public Media, welcome to another edition of Hangar Flying. My guests this evening are Audrey and Bruce Kelly. This is the third time on our show, and they conduct the Anchorage Memorial Park Cemetery tours several times a year. Welcome back to Hangar Flying.
Well, thank you.
Well, thank you.
So we talked about a little bit about Ray Peterson, Frank Dorbrandt. We talked a little about Bob Reeve. We didn't finish in the first program. Maybe we can start with that and kind of finish the story of Bob. Would you like to do that?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
We talked about him getting the name Glacier Pilot, but what happened after that was the forerunner of Revolution Airways. He was, of course, in the military, and he was the only civilian pilot allowed to fly over combat zones because he worked with CAA and also Alaska Communications Service. And of course, he was flying over the Aleutians and recognized that that could be a good place to initiate some air service. So after the war, he bought some surplus aircraft and started Reeve Aleutian Airways. He had that company for over 50 years. It was very, very successful. Reeve Aleutian Airways did fly their last flight in 2001, which was really kind of a shame. He died in 1993, and of course the family had taken over the business after Bob Reeves died. He was inducted, of course, into the Alaska Aviation Pioneer Hall of Fame, and that wasn't until 2005, sort of recently. But Revolution Airways and Bob and Tilly Reeves, what a family.
So before we move on to the next one, I want to just plug your tour. You have several tours throughout the summer, and there's one on the solstice, and then there are two others or more than two?
Yes,
Okay.
well, two others. One is July 13, the Stories Tour that we do with Linda Benson, who is the theatrical director. And we get actors, some very fine actors, I might add, who dress in costumes and relate what was previously a lecture for the Solstice Tour gets transformed into a first-person narrative. So the person at the gravesite is telling their story. And we have 10 grave sites that are visited. And then one year, Linda Benson pointed out that some people had told her that they weren't able to come to our tour, which was a self-guided walking tour from gravesite to gravesite. And she is the one who really started the idea of one set place where the actors in costume come one at a time onto a stage at the cemetery. And then people who really cannot walk easily across the cemetery grounds, just come. You're welcome to bring your own chair. And that is the performance that's done in August. And this year, that is going to be August 10,
Okay.
6 p.m.
Now, do you need a reservation? Can you just show up, and then where do you meet?
You meet at the John Burgoyne Gate at the corner of 7th and Cordova.
Okay.
And it is free to the public. You do not need a reservation.
Okay. Well, good. Well, that's good. I'll make sure that I'm there, and thanks for telling us that. So now let's move on to another legendary figure, Jack Jefford.
Ooh, Jack Jefford. He was one of those people used to call him a pilot's pilot, and he was involved in all kinds of search and rescue work and everything as he worked for the Civil Aeronautics Board. And he came up here to Alaska. Well, he first started off barnstorming down in the Midwest somewhere. I think it was Wyoming, Kansas, Nebraska, that kind of stuff. He'd put on air shows, and back in the days when those were quite popular. And he came up here to work for a guy by the name of Miro out of Nome, and the Miro Air Services, I think it was called. He worked for them for about a year, and then Miro was killed in a plane crash. And so he came back to Anchorage and ended up with the Civil Aeronautics Board, working for them for most of his life. I think he worked for them, I'm trying to remember how many years, but he retired from them. And he was involved in, initially, I think he started in 1940. He was involved in in working out the routes for the old Lend-Lease thing where the aircraft came up for were delivering to the Russians during the Second World War. He plotted out all those routes through Alaska at that point. He also set up a lot of routes through the Aleutians. And he was, anyway, he was just involved in a whole bunch of stuff. But I should also talk about Ruth Jeffords, who he married later in life. She was an aviator in her own right, and I think she was the first one that had a commercial license in Alaska. And she operated a flight school out of Merrill Field and did a lot on her own as far as aviation stuff. The two of them had known each other earlier in life, but came together after both of them, she had lost her husband and he had divorced. And they came together and formed a couple at the end there.
So there's a picture of the, if you go to the cemetery and look for Jack Jeffords' grave marker, then there's a prop next to it, so that's one indicator.
Yes.
And of course, if you're more interested in reading more about it, there's a book called Winging It that, that they've got. So, but anyway, I want to thank you very much, and I'll remember the August 10th. And what time was it again? That the
6 p.m.
6 o'clock. Okay, and I'll be there to watch you guys do your tour.
And we always try to talk about some aviators at some point.
Excellent. Okay, well, thank you very much for joining us on Hangar Flying. And folks, thank you for joining us, and fly safe.
All right, welcome back to the show, and let's take a look at the icing across the Beaufort Sea coast. There is some breaks between the seacoast and the ice, so there is some movement through there. So just be aware. It does look up on this scene that they're all blocked in here, but really there's ice across the area around Barrow back towards Point Franklin. So this area is still in ice, and some breaks in the ice along the Beaufort Sea coast. Now looking at your southeastern areas, the weather down there for tomorrow, the winds are going to be fairly light, all below small craft. Out of the across the channels, we'll mainly see a southerly flow and a northwest flow as you head towards the Dixon entrance, and the outside waters will see a west to northwesterly flow between 10 and 20 knots. Seas for Tuesday will be 2 feet across the inner channels and between 5 and 6 feet across the outer waters. Looking at your Wednesday forecast, a little bit of a change of direction, but still southerly across the northern channels and northwesterly across the southern areas. The outside waters will see more of a south to southwesterly flow, becoming more southeast as you head up towards Yakutat. Seas on this day will be 3 feet across the inner channels. Outside waters will mainly be right around 5 feet. Looking at your north and western Gulf area, looking at a variable wind for the Prince William Sound at 10 knots, and the flow across the western Gulf is going to be between 15 and 25 knots. Small craft here just south of Kodiak Island. Seas will be between 5 and 7 feet there. And then across the Cook Inlet and Shelikof Strait, expect winds to be out of the southerly direction between 15 and 20 knots. Seas will be around 4 to 5 feet. Across the Sound, we'll expect 2 feet seas for your Tuesday. And then on Wednesday, expect a little bit lighter wind speeds across the entire area. No small crafts again for this area on Wednesday. Looking at the Gulf waters, a 5 to 6 foot sea height, and then across the inlet between 2 and 3 feet as well for the Barren Islands and Shelikof Strait. Looking at Alaska Peninsula for Tuesday, a southwesterly flow across the area, small craft just to the south of Kodiak Island at 25 knots, and seas will be around 6 feet, except for the Bering we'll see between 4 and 5 foot seas. Heading into your Wednesday forecast, winds will be slightly less across that southern Kodiak Island area. All the wind speeds will be right around 20 knots with direction out of the west and southwest, and seas will be between 5 and 7 feet across the Bering side and about 6 feet for your Pacific side. Looking at your Tuesday forecast for the Aleutians, expect primarily a westerly direction between 15 and 20 knots, with seas between 3 and 5 feet across the Bering side back towards the western Aleutians. Pacific side will be between 5 and 6 feet. And then your Wednesday forecast, a westerly direction again, becoming more westerly towards the western Aleutians, and seas on this day will be between 3 and 5 feet, the highest seas on the North Pacific side. And then across the western coastal areas, expect a north to northwesterly flow becoming more west as you head towards the Central Bering and Bristol Bay, and that's going to be between 15 and 20 knots with seas between 4 to 6 feet, except 3 feet towards the Bristol Bay area. Your Wednesday forecast, a little bit change of direction, becoming more westerly to southwesterly, small crafts across the northern part of the Bering. And we'll see seas on this day between 5 and 7 feet. And your northwest and your north and northwestern coast will see northerly flow towards the Chukchi Sea and the Kotzebue Sound between 15 and 20 knots for your Tuesday, and a westerly direction 15 knots across the Arctic waters. Now seas along the coastal areas will be between 3 and 4 feet across the Chukchi Sea, and southward between 3 to 5 feet with the highest seas near Kotzebue Sound. On your Wednesday forecast, change of direction in the winds across the Arctic waters, around 15 knots out of the east to southeast direction, and then across. And as you head towards the northwest, it becomes a little bit more southerly between 10 and 20 knots. Seas on this day will be between 2 and 4 feet for those locations. Now, just a quick summary of your forecast as we head into tonight. The cold front that's draped across the central part of the state will make some progress to the east, bring rain towards the northeastern parts of the state and back towards the Seward Peninsula, and then beginning to creep into the southwest towards Bristol Bay. Patchy fog along these locations during the overnight hours, some light showers creeping into the eastern part of the Aleutians, Alaska Peninsula, staying partly cloudy overnight for most areas across south central and the interior, with showers tapering off across the southeast, patchy fog along the northeastern Gulf areas. As we head into your forecast for Tuesday, another dry day across the eastern areas and increasingly wet towards the middle of the week. I'll be back with you tomorrow. Have a good night.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Cook Inlet Tug and Barge is a marine transportation company specializing in harbor services with a primary marketing focus on the Port of Anchorage, providing their customers with quality-based service specifically tailored to their needs.